So, should you be concerned about tariffs? And are they going to affect you personally? Well, turns out they might. Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlight Studio, and I wanted to address this topic because obviously it's a pretty big one at the moment. And I want to start off by saying this is not a political video. I'm not taking sides on one side of the fence or the other. I'm not a terribly political person, but this is something that affects a lot of people. And this is really coming from the studio owner and professional musician's point of view. So that's really the aim of this video, since there seems to be a lot of kind of contradictory information that's floating around. And I've had a lot of people ask me about this. Is this something that's going to affect a musician or a studio owner? And the answer is yeah, it might. So I really want to dive in and look specifically at what tariffs are and who they're aimed at specifically and who ends up paying the cost of them. And this is coming from my own personal experience in trying to get a product off the ground as a small business. So I'll start off by saying, without a doubt, I am definitely not a professional economist, and I don't have that kind of background, and I don't want to get into the political side of it. That's not the aim of this video. It really is to determine whether or not we as musicians and studio owners need to be concerned about tariffs and how they affect our lives and our workflow.
A tariff is a tax on Americans. A tariff isn't paid by the exporter. China's not going to pay the tariff. The buyer is going to pay the tariff.
Now with a 10% tariff laid down, who pays that tariff? The American workers and the American companies pay the brunt of all those.
And again, if we start engaging in trade wars, I just don't believe anybody wins a trade war, quite honestly. I just think there's so much collateral damage. I think it's a very risky and dangerous strategy.
So first I want to start with my own personal experience about trying to bring a product to market. And this was several years ago, quite a few years ago, in fact. This was a friend of mine and I that designed an idea for an amplifier. And we wanted to bring this product to market. Now, it wasn't a particularly groundbreaking idea, but it was one of the few amps at their time, this was a power amplifier, that actually used a switching power supply, in addition to adding some hand-wired analog parts to the signal path. And this made a very organic and very powerful but great sounding amplifier, especially when it came to low-end transients and things like that. So that being said, we looked into creating the prototype and chassis of this with a lot of American-based manufacturers at the time. And keep in mind that we weren't dealing with anywhere near as much tariff issues that are currently going on today. And we immediately ran into some pretty big problems. And the first being that to develop something entirely American was unbelievably expensive compared to doing it overseas. And it was just a fact. And it wasn't necessarily even better. We actually found that we had more choices and more design options as well as more delivery options by going to China or even to Mexico. So what we found was the products, for example, in designing just the chassis by itself. We went through a lot of iterations and things, and this isn't even the finished prototype, but in the one that we finally did decide to try to get built, the Chinese options were vastly more cost effective. And in many ways, they were more effective in terms of just design ideas too, and things like hardware like knobs and the designs of the face plates and, color and palette options and things, and how it, adhered to the 19-inch gear rack standard and a bunch of other stuff like that. And what we found was, coming to the United States, which is the whole point of a tariff, is to try to motivate, in our case, design and manufacturing to all happen in America as opposed to another country. That's the intention of the tariff. It was so cost prohibitive. It was 800% more to have it done just in Mexico as opposed to China. And in America, if this entire product, say we wanted 100 prototypes of this particular chassis for this design, was 1,200% more. 1,200%. And this was many years ago. For example, had we ordered, offshore, and we ordered, say, 100 units of these, These would all show up at port. Only we would get the bill. Ports would notify us, and we would have to come up with the tariff that was being charged on those imported products. We had to pay that directly to the customs officials. So we paid it out of our own pockets. It wasn't absorbed by the company providing the service, in this case, the people designing the chassis itself, and it wasn't absorbed by any of the other people along the way, like the brokers and things like that, or the importers or exporters. It was absorbed by us. We paid it out of our own pockets. And this was also true of each one of the other pieces that we wanted to use to assemble the finished product. And this is the problem. This is really the crux of the entire issue. Manufacturers are playing a betting game. They're betting which one of, and it's not just manufacturers, this is also, when I say manufacturers, I mean people that are trying to bring a product to market. They're betting, they're playing kind of the long game, and they're trying to determine whether or not the trade and tariff situation is going to be in place 4 years from now when the administration potentially changes. Because if it does, then building factory and stateside versions of these same manufacturing plants isn't going to make a lot of financial sense, because it's still going to be a lot less expensive once those trade and tariffs are reduced. And this is an expensive gamble. To gear up for an entire manufacturing operation, the plant and the real estate and all of that, just to take advantage of a circumstance that might end up being temporary, is a very risky financial gamble for major corporations and major plants and manufacturing operations. So for smaller operations like people like us that are trying to bring a product to market, you bet we're absolutely going to try to find the best options for us that meet all the criteria that we need, but is still affordable enough for us to be able to compete with those European manufacturers. Because that's really the problem in the end, how to compete and make your product at least as attractive as, the one that's out there that's considerably more, affordable. I mean, there are companies that are doing it, Behringer and people like that, but they have massive financial reserves. For smaller companies that are trying to compete against other products, that's an entirely different story altogether. And this is really, like I said, the crux of the problem. It's very difficult to gamble that these situations, these tariff and trade wars, are going to be in existence long enough for manufacturers to completely gear up and change their entire manufacturing process and where it's currently located based on a circumstance that could potentially change. So you might be thinking, okay, I'll get around tariffs and their effects by buying entirely American-made products. Then I don't have to worry about it. Turns out that's pretty difficult to do, to buy a product that's entirely American-made. So let's start with some different kinds of electric and acoustic guitars. So this is a low-end Ovation guitar. It's the Celebrity Series. This is actually made in Korea. And the parts, tuners, mechanisms, things like that are made in different countries of origin as well. Let's look at Fender Sonoran line. This is controlled in California, as they say on the label, but it's manufactured in China, as well as a lot of the other associated things like the tuners and other things. Even a guitar, for example, like this Breedlove guitar. This is from my own hometown. And this beautiful guitar, beautiful plain guitar, is actually Korean made. And even the high end of these, even the custom shop ones that are done right here in town, still have parts of them that are not entirely made here in the United States. For example, like the Custom Shop Cascade Series and Premier Series, they have the LR Bags EAS systems in them as pickups. Those aren't manufactured here in Bend, Oregon, or even the United States. And these are expensive guitars. So for example, the Acoustic Sonics series of guitars by Fender, these are amazing modeling instruments and things. These are listed as being made in Ensenada, Mexico. But there's a variety of parts on here, the battery compartments, some of the modeling and electronic features, the tuners, they're not manufactured in Ensenada, Mexico. Another example of that would be the GNL version of the ASAT Telecaster. A wonderfully well-made, great value guitar, plays like a dream, but this particular one is made in Indonesia. And even all the parts aren't. The tuners, for example, they're not made in Indonesia. And even the venerable, and I mean the venerable, American-made Fender Telecaster. This is arguably one of the best instruments that you can get, certainly as a Telecaster. Even this one, manufactured in Corona, California, isn't manufactured entirely in Corona, California. There's a variety of parts on here that aren't. The tuners, for example, sometimes they're Shaler, sometimes they're Godet, and they're all manufactured in a variety of places like Japan and places like, you know, other countries entirely. So finding anything, even something as American as a Telecaster, that is made entirely in America is extremely difficult and complex if that's your idea of being insulated from the result of tariffs. Because all of these companies and all of these instruments have parts or components that are coming from places that are definitely going to be affected by those tariffs. And those companies are going to pass that cost and those tariffs onto you. So let's look at some pro audio based equipment and see how that compares in terms of where it comes from. So take, for example, these two products here. These are Clark Technic products, and while these used to be a company by itself, they eventually got bought out by Behringer and Midas. But these are a good example of products that are manufactured almost entirely in China. And even UA-based product companies like Black Lion Audio use components inside some of their units that aren't made entirely in the United States. And even the venerable Avalon, truly a marvel of hand-wired electronics, uses tubes and things that aren't made here in California. And so this is true of just about every kind of pro audio product in some fashion or another, including most audio interfaces you're probably using on your own. Things like Warm Audio products. These guys make some of the best mic clones in the world. Some of my favorite equipment, this particular one, the 251, is beloved. I use this on just about every session. And while some of these are created and designed here in the United States, they're largely assembled in China. You would be hard-pressed to find any pro audio or studio related gear that doesn't have some component or some kind of assembly that's done in China or in one of the countries that have current tariffs applied to them. So this really is the issue. This is the crux of the entire thing. And it's really not even the tariffs that are the issue. It's the instability in the market they cause. If you look at it from a manufacturer's point of view, if they already have a country of origin that they're doing manufacturing in, and they're taking advantage of that country's tax breaks and all that kind of stuff, for them to retool and completely upend their manufacturing process and move it all back to the United States just to take advantage of a current trade war or tariff war is an insanely expensive proposition for any company, even a huge company, companies like Apple and Fender and places, you know, companies like that that just have a huge amount of capital leverage. For them to do that based on a circumstance that at best is going to be unstable or maybe not permanent. So in the end, our musical lives, regardless of your side of the music business, whether you're a producer, an engineer, or you're a professional musician or a hobbyist, you know, road musician, it doesn't really matter, session player, studio owner, we're all affected by this. Nobody wins a trade war, nobody. The risk, the instability, all of that cost is going to be passed on to you and me. This deluxe reverb amp, for example, it might have been conceived in California, but it's made in China. The R&D for this Vox AC-15, it might have been done in England, but it's manufactured in Mexico. And that's really the issue here. It isn't even the tariffs themselves, but the instability that the tariffs cause. The tariffs could evaporate tomorrow, and there's talk that they might. But the threat that they'll come back causes instability. And instability causes expense. And you and I, directly, we pay for that. So what can we do right now? Well, aside from hoping for a brighter future, we can plan our purchases, especially our larger purchases, intelligently around the tariff schedule. And we can hope that the market stabilizes, because that in the end is really the most beneficial circumstance for all of us combined. Nobody wins a trade war. There are no winners here. The best we can hope for is stability. Hey, thanks for hanging out, guys. I appreciate it if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way. Please hit the subscription and notification bells. It does help keep a channel like this going. Stay safe, be creative, Add something creative to the world. It could really use it. Take care. We'll catch you guys in the next video.